It was the middle of the night, the kind of hour where the world feels cold and every mistake feels permanent. I was sitting on my bed, tears blurring my vision, typing a message that was supposed to be my exit strategy. My manager had spent months making my life a living hell, stealing my work, gaslighting me in meetings, and making off-color comments that made my skin crawl. I finally snapped. I wrote it all down. Every bribe he took, every lie he told, and every way he had systematically destroyed my career. I meant to send it to my best friend, Maya. I wanted her to tell me I was brave. I hit send. But then, I saw the name at the top of the chat. It wasn't Maya. It was a number I didn't recognize, a number I had saved months ago from a company-wide directory for emergency only. What if the hand holding yours is the same one digging your grave, and the only person who can stop the shovel is the man you're most afraid of? My heart didn't just stop, it felt like it imploded. I had just sent the most explosive secrets of the company to the private cell phone of Julian Thorne, the CEO, the billionaire, the man they called the executioner. I was 26, living in a studio apartment that smelled like cheap coffee and damp dreams. I had moved to the city with a degree and a hope that hard work actually meant something. But Thorne Global wasn't a company, it was a predator tank. I was an assistant to Liam Brooks, a man who wore a $5,000 suit but had a 5-cent soul. Liam made sure I was always the last one to leave and the first one to get blamed. He told me I was lucky to even have a desk. He made me feel like a mouse in a golden cage, convincing me that if I ever left, I'd starve. What if the person who promised to mentor you is actually the one orchestrating your disappearance? I stayed because I had bills. I stayed because I thought Julian Thorne, the man at the top, was just as corrupt as the man I worked for. I thought they were all the same, until that text message delivered that I waited for the typing bubble to appear. I waited for the Human Resources Department to call me and tell me I was sued, fired, and blacklisted. But there was only silence. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. I barely slept. I sat by my window, watching the rain hit the glass, wondering if I should just pack a bag and leave the state. Then, at 4 a.m., my phone buzzed. A single message from the emergency contact. It didn't say, "You're fired." It didn't say, "Who is this?" It said, "Bring the original files to my private residence at 6 a.m. A car is outside." I walked to my window and looked down. A black sedan was idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the fog like a predator's eyes. What if the mercy of a stranger is more dangerous than the hatred of an enemy? I had no choice. I grabbed my laptop and walked out the door. Julian Thorne's penthouse was cold. Not just the temperature, but the atmosphere. It was all glass, steel, and shadows. When he finally walked into the room, he didn't look like the man from the magazine covers. He looked exhausted. He held my phone in his hand, displaying my text. "Liam Brooks thinks he's invisible," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "But you just gave me the eyes I've been missing." He sat across from me and leaned in. "He told you I knew about the bribes, didn't he? He told you I was the one who ordered the layoffs." I nodded, my voice stuck in my throat. Julian let out a dark, dry laugh. "Sarah, Liam wasn't just stealing from the company. He was using my name to threaten you. What if the truth is staring you in the face, but the person you love is convincing you that you're going crazy?" I realized then that Liam hadn't just been a bad boss. He had been a parasite, using Julian's reputation as a shield to keep me silent. Julian made me an offer that made my head spin. He didn't want to fire me. He wanted me to go back. "Go back to your desk," he whispered. "Act like you're still the broken mouse. Let him think he's won. Collect the rest of the data on his private server, and by Friday he won't just be fired. He'll be erased. What if the perfect victim he thinks he's playing is actually the one holding the keys to his cage?" For the first time in years, the fear in my chest turned into something else. It was cold. It was sharp. It was fury. I realized that Julian Thorne wasn't my enemy. He was my weapon. I walked back into that office at 9 a.m., and when Liam Brooks yelled at me for being 5 minutes late, I didn't apologize. I just smiled. Because I knew something he didn't do by Wednesday, I was deep into Liam's private server. But as I searched for the financial records, I found something much worse. A folder labeled Sarah M. I clicked it, my heart hammering. Inside were photos of me. Photos of me in my apartment. Photos of me at the grocery store. Liam hadn't just been gaslighting me at work, he had been stalking me. And there was more. A legal document showing that Liam had taken out a massive life insurance policy in my name, listing himself as the beneficiary. What if the person feeding you is the same one who's been poisoning your life for years? He wasn't just trying to ruin my career. He was waiting for me to break completely. My hands shook as I realized the wrong number. Text hadn't just saved my job. It had probably saved my life. I sat in the bathroom stall of the office, the cold towel pressing against my back, gasping for air. Finding that folder, the photos, the insurance policy, it felt like the floor had turned into glass and shattered. What if your lowest moment was actually the foundation of your greatest revenge? I looked at my reflection in the small, compact mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my skin sallow. I looked like easy prey. And that's exactly what Liam wanted. He wanted me to crumble so he could collect his prize. I realized then that every encouraging word he'd said after a hard day, every time he'd offered to drive me home, it was all part of a hunt. I almost picked up my bag and ran. I almost called the police. But I remembered Julian's voice. He thinks he's invisible. Give me the eyes I've been missing. If I ran now, Liam would just hide. He would find someone else. Another Sarah. No, I wasn't going to run. I was going to be the last thing he ever saw coming that I walked out of that bathroom and did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I looked Liam Brooks directly in the eye and smiled. Not a fake, shaky smile, a calm, cold one. The reports are on your desk, Liam, I said, my voice steady. He looked up, surprised by the lack of fear in my tone. About time, Sarah, he sneered, leaning back in his chair. You're getting slow. Maybe the pressure is finally getting to you. In the past, I would have apologized. I would have felt the sting of his words. Now, they felt like a compliment. I watched him pull the files toward him, files that Julian and I had carefully altered that morning. What if the perfect victim he thinks he's playing is actually the one holding the keys to his cage? I sat at my desk and began the shadow phase. I wasn't just working for him anymore. I was haunting him. Every email I forwarded to Julian, every keystroke I logged, was another nail in Liam's professional coffin. I wasn't tired anymore. I was electric. For the next 3 days, I played the part of the century. I let Liam correct me. I let him take credit for the Thorne global expansion deck during the board meeting. I even let him buy me a coffee. The same coffee I watched him, generously, offer while I secretly recorded our conversation on a device Julian had hidden in my pen. What if the hand holding yours is the same one digging your grave? Liam was getting cocky. He started talking about a big promotion coming his way, bragging about how Julian Thorne trusted him implicitly. Little did he know, every time Julian nodded at him in the hallway, it was the nod a judge gives a man before the sentence is read. I spent my lunch breaks in the server room, my heart hammering as I bypassed security protocols I didn't even know existed. Julian was on the other end of the encrypted line, guiding me. We were a team, a billionaire king and a forgotten assistant, dismantling a monster from the inside out. Thursday afternoon was the hottest day of the year, but inside the office, the air was freezing. I was hunched over Liam's computer while he was supposedly in a long lunch with a client. Julian had told me there was one final encrypted file, a log of the physical addresses where Liam had hidden the physical assets he'd skimmed from the company. My fingers flew across the keys. The progress bar crawled. 60%. 70%. What if the silence you're counting on is actually the moment the trap snaps shut? Suddenly, the heavy oak door to the office creaked open. I didn't have time to log out. I didn't even have time to stand up. I dropped my pen under the desk and dove after it just as Liam walked in. I stayed on the floor, my heart thundering, so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I could see his expensive Italian leather shoes stopping inches from my face. "Sarah!" he asked, his voice dripping with that fake, oily concern. "What are you doing under my desk?" I crawled out slowly, clutching the pen, my face flushed with a heat that wasn't fake. "I dropped my pen, Liam. I'm sorry, I was just reaching for it." He stared at me, his eyes narrowing, his gaze darting to his monitor. The screensaver had kicked in, but the cooling fan of the CPU was whirring like a jet engine. He looked back at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You seem nervous, Sarah. Are you sure you're feeling okay? You've been acting different lately." He reached out and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. His hand was cold. "Just remember," he whispered, "I'm the only one in this building who actually cares what happens to you." I nodded, swallowed my disgust, and walked out. I had the file on a thumb drive in my pocket, but for the first time, I realized just how close I was to the edge of the cliff that night. Julian called me. Not a text, but a voice call. "He knows something is wrong," Julian said. "He's going to move the funds tonight. We have to finish this tomorrow morning at the quarterly gala." The plan was simple but devastating. Julian was going to give a keynote speech about transparency and loyalty. During that speech, I was to use the master override Julian had given me to project Liam's private Sarah M. folder and the insurance fraud documents onto the 40-foot main screen in front of the board of directors and the press. What if the perfect victim he thinks he's playing is actually the one holding the keys to his cage? I barely slept. I spent the night looking at the photos Liam had taken of me. The more I looked, the more the fear burned away, leaving only a hard, diamond-like core of spite. I realized he didn't love me. He didn't even want me. He wanted to own my destruction. He had spent years building a cage made of gaslighting and debt, and he was waiting for the moment I gave up so he could profit from my end. But he had forgotten one thing. A cornered animal doesn't just give up. It bites. I dressed for the gala in a deep red dress, the color of a warning sign. When the car arrived to pick me up, I didn't look like an assistant. I looked like an executioner. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and sparkling diamonds. Liam was in his element, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with the board members, acting as if he already owned the building. He saw me and smirked, walking over to parade me like a trophy assistant. "Stay close, Sarah," he hissed under his breath. "Today is a big day for us. Don't ruin it." Then Julian Thorne took the stage. The room went silent. Julian looked directly at me for a split second, a silent signal. "Success isn't just about profit," Julian began, his voice echoing through the hall. "It's about the people you trust to build that profit with you. And sometimes we find a cancer in our midst." On the giant screen behind him, a PowerPoint began. But it wasn't the quarterly earnings. It was a photo of Liam's offshore account summary. Then, a voice recording started playing over the high-end sound system. It was Liam's voice, clear as a bell, talking about how he was bleeding the company dry and how Sarah Miller was his insurance policy. The room gasped. Liam's glass shattered on the floor. He turned to me, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "You," he choked out. "What if the confrontation you've been fearing is actually the moment you finally find your voice?" I didn't look away. I didn't tremble. I just leaned in and whispered loud enough for the people around us to hear. "I sent a text to the wrong number, Liam. But it turns out it was the only right thing I've ever done." The silence in the ballroom was heavier than any scream. Liam stood frozen, his eyes darting from the giant screen to the faces of the board members, who now looked at him with pure disgust. The invincible Liam Brooks was disintegrating in real time. He tried to speak, to offer one last lie, one last piece of gaslighting. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Sarah's unstable. She's obsessed with me." But Julian Thorne didn't even give him the satisfaction of an argument. Julian simply gestured to the back of the room. Two men in dark suits, federal investigators Julian had briefed days ago, stepped forward. What if the pride that built your empire is the very thing that ensures its collapse? As the handcuffs clicked around Liam's wrists, the sound resonated through the silent hall. He looked at me one last time, his face twisted in a mask of hatred, but for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no pity, not even satisfaction. Just a clean, cold emptiness. He was led out of the gala, past the people who had toasted him only minutes before. He had spent years making me feel small, but as the heavy oak doors closed behind him, he was the one who looked microscopic. The cage he had built for me hadn't just been unlocked, it had been leveled to the ground. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of legal depositions and corporate restructuring. Thorne Global was in shock, but Julian moved with the precision of a surgeon. He didn't just fire Liam, he erased every trace of his influence. And as for me, I expected to be let go. I was, after all, a reminder of a massive security breach and a PR nightmare. I sat in Julian's office on Friday morning, my bags packed, ready to return to the world of what-ifs. But Julian didn't hand me a severance check. He handed me a folder. "Liam's insurance policy on your life has been voided," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "And the funds he moved into your name, the court has ruled they are to be held in a trust for you as restitution for the psychological damages." I stared at the numbers. It was more money than I would have made in 10 years of cleaning offices. What if the wrong turn you took today is actually the path to your justice? I looked at Julian, trying to understand why a man who could have any employee in the world had chosen to stand by me. "You didn't have to do any of this," I whispered. He leaned back, the city's skyline reflecting in his eyes. "In this world, Sarah, people like Liam think they can use the silence of others to hide. I didn't save you. You chose to speak. I just provided the microphone." As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment a month later, watching the city lights flicker like a million tiny possibilities, I thought about that text message. A single, desperate, mistyped number. Most people would call it a mistake, a moment of clumsiness, but I realized it was something else entirely. It was the universe providing an exit when I was too tired to find the door. What if the confrontation you've been fearing is actually the moment you finally find your voice? We are taught from a young age to be careful, to be silent, to not cause trouble. We stay in the cages people build for us because the outside world looks too big and too cold. But the truth is, the people who try to keep you small are always the ones who are most afraid of you getting big. Liam didn't stalk me because I was weak. He stalked me because he knew that if I ever realized my own power, he wouldn't stand a chance. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom or a badge. Sometimes it comes from a wrong number and the courage to tell the truth to a stranger. My life is different now. I don't wake up with a knot in my stomach. I don't check my bank account with a shaking hand. I work directly under Julian now, not as an assistant, but as a lead in the very department Liam once corrupted. I see the world through a different lens. Every time I see someone struggling, every time I see a Sarah being pushed into a corner by a Liam, I remember the weight of that phone in my hand. What if the person feeding you is the same one who's been poisoning your life? It's a question we should all ask ourselves, because once you identify the poison, you can finally start to heal. I looked at my phone, the old conversation with the emergency contact, still there. I never deleted it. It serves as a reminder that even in our darkest, most desperate moments, we are never truly alone. Sometimes, the hero of your story isn't a billionaire or a knight. Sometimes, the hero is just the person brave enough to hit send. My name is Sarah Miller, and this was my revenge. But more importantly, it was my beginning. Most people will watch this story and think it was just luck. But you're here because you know that justice is never an accident. It's a choice. If this story made your blood boil, or gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, then you belong here. Join our inner circle by hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell. At Dear Revenge Diary, we don't just tell stories, we expose the shadows that the world tries to hide. What if your story is the next one we tell? Drop a 100 in the comments if you've ever turned a betrayal into a comeback. You don't want to miss the next secret.